Thus was life in Jericho, the forbidden city where women were offered to the gods. Jericho was such an ancient and powerful city that its inhabitants believed they were invincible, surrounded by gigantic walls, full of wealth, luxury, and limitless pleasures. But at the same time, it was a place where idolatry, corruption, and immorality completely dominated the lives of the people. Within the temples, sexual rituals were performed in the name of pagan gods. Men and women gave themselves to sin without fear of the consequences, believing that nothing could destroy them, until everything collapsed in an inexplicable way. What really happened inside the walls of Jericho? Why was this city, which thrived in the midst of the desert, completely destroyed? And does its history serve as a warning for today's world? But before you like and subscribe to the channel to receive notifications of more exciting videos. Jericho is a mysterious city, so ancient that its origin dates back to the dawn of humanity. A prosperous place, surrounded by immense stone walls, filled with riches, and known as one of the first great urban centers in the world. But it was also a place immersed in idolatry, corruption, and immorality. This was Jericho. Now, think with me. If you were there, living within those impregnable walls, surrounded by luxury and excess, would you believe that any army could bring them down? The truth is that the inhabitants of Jericho were so confident in their fortress that they never imagined what was coming. The Bible tells us in Joshua 6 verses 1 to 2, "Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men.'" Jericho was not just an ordinary city. It was a symbol, a representation of a society that had completely lost its way. On the surface, it was a city of grandeur and wealth, surrounded by towering walls that spoke of its strength and fortitude. Its inhabitants lived in comfort, surrounded by riches, luxuries, and a way of life that many envied. But beneath the surface, the heart of Jericho was diseased, infected by sin, idolatry, and corruption. The city had become a mirror of everything that distanced humanity from God's purpose. While its walls stood tall and its gates opened to a bustling marketplace, the true devastation lay in the hearts of its people. They had replaced worship of the true God with false gods, deities crafted in their own image and desires. They sought security in idols made of wood, stone, and gold, believing that these powerless gods could offer them more than the creator of the universe could. As a result, sin began to spread like a disease, infecting every corner of the city. The people of Jericho not only worshipped these false gods, but they also sacrificed their children, believing that such rituals would bring them blessings and prosperity. It's hard to imagine the depths of depravity to which they had sunk. The act of sacrificing children, an innocent life, revealed the complete disregard for human dignity and divine morality. In their pursuit of favor from these false gods, they were willing to engage in horrific practices, turning their backs on the sanctity of life and abandoning the moral standards that God had set. The city's leadership, instead of guiding the people toward righteousness, had embraced corruption. Every level of society, from the highest ruler to the lowliest servant, had become tainted. The merchants traded in goods, but at what cost? They too were complicit in fostering a society of degradation, where wealth and power became the ultimate goals, often attained by exploiting the weak and vulnerable. Immorality permeated every layer of the city, from the marketplaces to the temples. Acts of debauchery and sin were commonplace, so much so that they were no longer questioned. What was once viewed as abhorrent was now normalized, making it difficult for anyone to recognize the depth of their moral decay. Before diving into the immorality of the women of Jericho, we must understand the context that made such behavior not only possible but rampant. The people had drifted so far from the truth that they no longer knew what was right. Their culture had been built on the foundations of idolatry and sin, and in such an environment, immorality was no longer shocking. It was expected. These actions weren't just personal choices, but the very fabric of Jericho's society. Immorality became institutionalized, and those who lived by it had no concept of the consequences. They didn't see it as wrong because their entire existence had been shaped by a worldview that lacked any foundation in the truth of God's law. This moral blindness was perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Jericho's downfall. No one could see the danger they were in until it was too late. What was even more devastating is that the people of Jericho had forgotten the very God who had created them, blessed them, and protected them. They had exchanged the truth for a lie and sought fulfillment in things that could never truly satisfy. The immorality that took root in the city was not just a series of isolated acts, but the result of a deep spiritual void. They had created their own gods, and in doing so, they severed the connection between themselves and the true source of life. It wasn't just about the women of Jericho or the men. This was a reflection of the collective moral collapse of the entire city, a place where everything that once represented God's goodness had been replaced by sin. What had once been a prosperous, blessed city had become a symbol of all that leads humanity away from the path of righteousness. The immorality that ran rampant in Jericho didn't happen overnight. It was the culmination of years of turning away from the divine, calling to live in truth, integrity, and holiness. If I told you that before Rome, before the Egypt of the pharaohs, and even before Babylon, there existed a prosperous and well-established city, a place where humanity began to transition from a nomadic lifestyle to one of permanence, that city would be Jericho. The story of Jericho stretches back over 10,000 years, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Its origins lie within what historians call the Fertile Crescent, a region that was uniquely blessed by God. This area, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, is where the first humans learned to domesticate plants and animals, setting the stage for the rise of agriculture and the establishment of permanent settlements. Jericho's place in this transformation is pivotal. It represents one of the earliest examples of human civilization shifting from the uncertainty of nomadic life to the security of settled communities. While other tribes were still wandering, searching for food and sustenance, the people of Jericho had discovered the key to survival. They learned how to tame the land. They cultivated crops, raised livestock, and, most importantly, they figured out how to make a living from the soil. This was no small achievement. In an era when survival was a daily challenge, Jericho's inhabitants had created a model of stability. They could harvest crops and raise animals with predictable results, which allowed them to build a foundation for more advanced societies. What made Jericho especially remarkable was its location. Unlike many other cities, which were limited by their geography, Jericho had a unique advantage: a freshwater spring situated right in the middle of the desert. In a harsh, arid landscape like the one surrounding Jericho, fresh water was an invaluable resource. The spring provided not only the basic necessities of life, but it also enabled the inhabitants of Jericho to thrive in an environment that would otherwise have been inhospitable. Where there is water, there is life, and Jericho's abundance of fresh water made it a rare oasis in the wilderness. This natural gift gave the city an enormous advantage, not only for its residents but for anyone who passed through the region. Merchants, shepherds, and travelers from distant lands would stop in Jericho to rest, replenish their supplies, and seek shelter. It became a crucial point for trade, where goods from different regions could be exchanged, making Jericho a hub of commerce and culture. Its strategic location in the Jordan Valley further cemented Jericho's importance. The city lay along key trade routes, facilitating the movement of people and goods between the east and west, as well as the north and south. The fertile land surrounding Jericho also allowed the people to produce surplus crops, which they could sell or trade with neighboring regions. This abundance, combined with the city's role as a stopping point for travelers, meant that Jericho grew rich in both resources and influence. It became a crossroads of civilization, a place where cultures mingled and ideas were exchanged. Its success as a trade center attracted people from all over the ancient world, from far-flung regions like Mesopotamia and Egypt, contributing to the city's diverse population. But Jericho was more than just a place of commerce. It was a place where early human civilization began to lay the groundwork for what would become the foundations of modern society. The advancements in agriculture, trade, and construction made in Jericho would echo throughout history, influencing future generations of builders, traders, and farmers. The people of Jericho not only learned to live off the land, but they also began to build on it. They constructed the earliest known city walls, making Jericho one of the first fortified cities in human history. These walls were not just practical. They symbolized the city's strength, its ability to defend itself against invaders, and its place as a vital part of the growing civilization. In a time when the future was uncertain and many other tribes still lived in tents, Jericho had become a beacon of progress and stability. The city's evolution from a simple settlement to a flourishing metropolis marked the beginning of a new chapter in human history. It was a place where innovation thrived, where the seeds of civilization were sown, and where humanity took its first steps toward creating a lasting legacy. In the grand story of human history, Jericho holds a place of honor, representing the ingenuity, resilience, and hope of early humanity as they sought to build something permanent in an ever-changing world. If I told you that before Rome, before Egypt's pharaohs, and even before Babylon, there was a prosperous and well-established city where humanity first transitioned from a nomadic lifestyle to one of permanence, that city would be Jericho. The history of Jericho dates back over 10,000 years, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. It was situated in the Fertile Crescent, a region that historians recognize as uniquely blessed by God. Stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, this area witnessed humanity's first steps toward civilization, where early humans learned to domesticate plants and animals. This was the foundation for agriculture, a revolutionary development that allowed humanity to shift from the uncertainty of nomadic existence to the security and stability of settled communities. Unlike other tribes that wandered in search of food, the people of Jericho discovered how to tame the land. They mastered farming and herding, learning how to grow crops, raise livestock, and produce food with predictable results. This agricultural revolution was a monumental achievement in a time when survival was never guaranteed. By learning to work with the land, the people of Jericho established a model for stability that would influence future generations. This knowledge was passed down and became the bedrock for developing more complex societies, where people could settle in one place, build homes, and create lasting infrastructure. Jericho's success wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving in an environment that was otherwise inhospitable. What made Jericho particularly remarkable was its location. Unlike many other ancient cities, Jericho had a natural advantage, a freshwater spring right in the middle of the desert. In the harsh, dry landscape surrounding Jericho, water was an incredibly rare and valuable resource. Fresh water meant that Jericho could support not only its own population, but also serve as a vital refuge for travelers, merchants, and shepherds journeying through the region. The abundance of water allowed the city's residents to cultivate crops and raise livestock, while also providing for those passing through. In such a desolate area, Jericho became a beacon of life, a fertile oasis in the middle of the wilderness. This natural gift of water made Jericho a strategic hub, as it attracted merchants and travelers who needed to rest and replenish their supplies. The city became an essential stopping point on trade routes, where goods were exchanged and cultures collided. Jericho's importance only grew because of its strategic location in the Jordan Valley, which connected several major trade routes running from east to west and north to south. This made Jericho a crossroads of ancient civilizations. The fertile land surrounding Jericho allowed for the cultivation of surplus crops, which could be traded with neighboring regions. Jericho's wealth was not just about local agriculture, but also about its role as a center of commerce. With its advantageous position along vital trade routes, It became a melting pot of cultures, languages, and ideas. Merchants from far-off places like Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond came to trade, bringing with them not only goods but also new knowledge and innovations. Jericho thus became an intersection of ancient cultures, where people from different parts of the world could meet, trade, and share their experiences. But Jericho was more than just a trading post. It was an early example of how human civilization began to lay the foundations for future societies. The city's advancements in agriculture, trade, and urban development would echo through the ages, influencing future cities and cultures. Jericho's people didn't just learn to live off the land. They learned how to build on it. The construction of walls around the city, some of the earliest known fortifications, is evidence of Jericho's importance and strategic thinking. These walls represented the city's ability to protect itself from external threats, signaling the importance of security in a growing society. The fortifications symbolized not only physical strength, but also the resilience of the people of Jericho in the face of challenges. At a time when many other communities were still living in tents and moving from place to place, Jericho had become a beacon of stability. It was a place where human ingenuity and progress thrived. The city evolved from a humble settlement to a thriving metropolis, marking the beginning of a new chapter in human history. In Jericho, humanity took its first steps toward creating something permanent in an ever-changing world. It was in this city that the early seeds of modern society were planted, as people learned to live in harmony with the land, trade with one another, and protect their resources. Jericho stands as a testament to the resilience of humanity and the desire to build something lasting, even in a world filled with uncertainty. Jericho's place in history is not just one of survival, but one of innovation, adaptation, and growth. The people of Jericho were among the first to make significant strides toward the creation of urban civilization, laying the groundwork for cities and societies that would rise in the centuries to follow. In the grand narrative of human progress, Jericho holds a special place, serving as a symbol of the early days of human development, the promise of stability, and the pursuit of a lasting legacy in a world that was at the time still very young. But here's something curious. Whenever man prospers, he risks forgetting God. The history of humanity proves this repeatedly. And that's exactly what began to happen in Jericho. The city, which began as a miracle of civilization, started drifting away from the Creator, and thus, what was once a center of blessings turned into a place of excess, idolatry, and corruption. But how did this happen? What made Jericho deviate from God's plan and become a symbol of decay? Soon, we will talk more about the immorality of the women and men of Jericho, but before that, we need to discuss the luxury inside the walls. Jericho was not just an ancient city. It was a symbol of prosperity and ostentation. Anyone who passed through its gates encountered busy streets, markets filled with valuable goods, and luxurious houses adorned with tapestries and gold objects. Merchants came from all parts to sell spices, rare fabrics, and precious stones. But behind this gleam, there was a dark side that few dared question. The city was a center of wealth, and where there is wealth without the fear of God, there is also corruption. The rulers lived surrounded by luxury, taking advantage of the resources from trade and the exploitation of the population. Money flowed freely, but with it came excess. Biblical and historical accounts describe Jericho as a place immersed in idolatry. Different gods were worshipped, and temples were erected for religious practices that involved questionable rituals, including human sacrifices and sacred prostitution ceremonies. The true God had been forgotten, replaced by images and beliefs that promised fertility, abundant harvests, and pleasure without consequences. The inhabitants of Jericho saw no problem with their customs. For them, their impregnable walls ensured safety, and their gods blessed them with abundance. But what they didn't realize was that every act of corruption, every idol worship, and every immoral practice drew them further and further from the truth. The city became a classic example of what happens when man places his trust in wealth and power, ignoring God's principles. History shows us that this same mistake was repeated in other civilizations. Rome, in its golden age, was a powerful empire but sank into moral and spiritual decay before its fall. Sodom and Gomorrah were prosperous cities, but they were destroyed due to their corruption. Jericho followed this same path, and its destruction would serve as a warning for all future generations. The most impressive thing is that this same mentality is reflected in today's world. The reckless pursuit of pleasure, the trust in wealth, and the disdain for spiritual values are behaviors that continue to lead people and entire nations to ruin.